Hey there, folks. Joey D'Angelo's here with a new Movie Squad video on the Season 5 premiere of Samurai Jack. That's right, Samurai Jack is back on Adult Swim Saturdays at 11. And, wow, it's pretty crazy to think that this thing is back after so long. They announced it back in 2015 it would return last year, but that got pushed to this year, and oh man, it's just great to have this good revival, or at least so far what has been a good revival of a cartoon. There's only going to be 10 episodes in this new season, but let's get right to it. There will be spoilers, so, if you haven't seen this new episode, if you've never seen Samurai Jack, I recommend you check out some episodes, and, check obviously. I'm going to do a video at some point, my favorite Samurai Jack episodes, so stay tuned for that. Anyhow, Samurai Jack. This takes place 50 years after the original series. Jack does not age and has lost his magic sword. We see a clip of him losing his magic sword, I believe like towards the middle or towards the end of the episode when he's facing the bounty hunter in this episode. And so it's kind of a weird way, a bleaker world. Well, not bleaker in the design, but looks like where Jack is at and some of the other locations we've seen, it looks more primal, more natural than Aku's, futuristic city landscapes that we are used to from, the original series. So this episode, Jack is... the beginning of the episode starts off, a lot of these clips you may have seen in the trailers and some of the clips they've released online, but, again, that's just implying things, so you don't know the exact context for them. But first, this episode starts off where Jack kind of began, where he fights off a bunch of robo-beetles made by Aku. And you notice Jack doesn't use his sword, he uses other weapons. He uses his motorcycle, he uses his giant staff, he just uses different weapons, uses a gun. I mean, this is it's pretty interesting because you forget that Jack is trained in other forms of combat outside of just using a sword, but usually you see Jack lets the sword do the talking in certain fight sequences. So it's kind of bizarre in a way to see him without the sword, but he definitely kicks butt. It's pretty awesome. And so that's that scene. We get also the emergence of Aku's daughters. It almost feels like a cult, and we actually don't see Aku in the flesh in this episode. We hear his laugh vaguely in one scene, and we see his statue and like a faint like spirit, but we don't see Aku in the flesh in this episode. We see the daughters of Aku, which feels like, again, like I said, this cult group that their whole point in life is to grow up to try to track down and kill Samurai Jack. And you see it's like almost like a brutal like Spartan training where it's like you have to ditch people, and it's about strength, and are you tough enough to do this? Death is failure, all that kind of stuff. And it seems like from the preview we're gonna see them fight Jack in this week's episode. Anyway, I'm recording this on Sunday, and they seem pretty intimidating. It seems like a good adversary for Jack. Another bit in this episode that's of note is that Jack is kind of experiencing some PTSD. I'll call it PTSD, or he's experiencing intense visions of his parents and also the people of Japan who he technically failed. And what I mean by that is, you remember in the original series, in like the first episode, he goes back to fight Aku, but then Aku transports him back to the future, and basically leaving behind the people of Japan to suffer under Aku's reign. And Jack's dealing with like visions of his father and his mother and all these looked like zombified people of Japan, talking about how much they've suffered and how he failed. And after all these years, he still hasn't killed Aku. He still hasn't accomplished his purpose. He never returned back to the past. He never slayed Aku. So he's getting all, like, again, like these intense visions, just waves and waves of these people just begging and screaming. And it even comes up later on in a fight where Jack goes to this town where he faces off against the main adversary for the episode, and he sees visions of like children clinging at him, you know, saying that he's failed and that they've died, or things of that nature. So you really get this sense of guilt, this mass guilt that Jack has after all these years. He still hasn't fulfilled his destiny. So I guess we'll go to the main villain of this episode. I believe he was a Scaramouche. I believe he was a robot named Scaramouche, and he was very much, musically inclined. And this might be weird for some people who thought, Adult Swim's going to be more intense, more dark. And I'm like, well, the other thing with Samurai Jack is it was known for just a weird sense of humor as well. There were just so many like weird oddball type of characters. I mean, one of the most popular characters was the Scotsman, who was big and loud and proud, and he's a great character. But again, people, I think, forget that Samurai Jack could be really funny. I mean, hell, the first episode, like one of the first episodes in the original series, in like the first 3 episodes, Jack fights those beetles, but he fights those beetles in service of archaeologist talking dogs. Okay, so sometimes, Jack can be very serious, yes, like in The Birth of Evil, but sometimes it's just straight up silly. But this worked in an intimidating sense, because this guy was able to use a flute to summon rock monsters, and he used like a tuning fork, and was able to, scat and sing. And there was a really nice fight sequence, actually. And I don't know, I just thought it was a lot of fun, and Scaramouche kind of made sense in the line of great, fun Samurai Jack bounty hunters or Samurai Jack characters that we've seen over the course of the series. Another like Easter egg that I really picked up on, and I picked this up on the trailer, was that you see Jack's father like hung up in one scene, like burning alive. It's like a vision of his father saying to Jack that he's forgotten his purpose. And the way he's hung up is very similar to his pose when Aku straps him down and forces Jack's father to watch the destruction of his kingdom. And it's just, especially if you're like a fan of that episode, The Birth of Evil, you really get like, oh my goodness, it's, his father has done all this work against Aku and got captured and was used as a slave, only for, in a way, his son to not succeed. And it's not Jack's fault, obviously, because Aku's a massive adversary, but you feel the intense guilt of Jack, and you think about the sacrifices of his family that they had to make. So overall, this was a very nice return to the world of Samurai Jack. It did feel different in certain ways they portrayed the action sequences. One thing I wanted to mention is that this is in widescreen now, in this age of like high definition TVs, whereas back in the original series, the TV was like 1:3:1 like aspect ratio, where it was a box, and they really had to play with the aspect ratio in order to get those really like intense close-up shots of Jack's eyes and certain action sequences. Whereas the aspect ratio isn't played as much, but it definitely, stretches and plays around a little bit, especially during the fight with the beetles in the beginning of the episode. So overall, great return to Samurai Jack. I'm really looking forward to next week, and I'm going to talk about the next 9 episodes for the next couple of weeks. What do you guys think of this new episode? Are you excited? Let us know in the comment section below, and subscribe to Movie Squad for more videos on Samurai Jack and everything else awesome. Thank you.